Okay, welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to have you all with us again this afternoon. And as we continue our series of weekly webinars, and now we are shifting into a different gear. In the last few weeks, we've struggled and debated and engaged with all of the medical issues and the practicalities of a return to shuls and everything that means for our community and how we stay safe and yet find our way back. But now we begin our journey towards Rosh Hashanah, and we start to prepare ourselves emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, lining up with our Torah values and also looking for perspective. We have, in a sense, lived through historic times over the last 5-6 months. The world has almost been shifted off its axis in remarkable ways, and that's why I'm so delighted to have my dear mentor and friend, if I may say, Rabbi Berel Wein, to join us on this occasion, because Rabbi Wein is a Torah scholar of renown around the world, but he also has a tremendous perspective of history and the sweep of human affairs and understanding the context. And I think that for me is one of the great challenges that we have as a society and as a community, is to see context and to see perspective. And that's why I thought it's so important to draw on the wisdom of a historian, but particularly a historian who comes from a Torah perspective, who is not only a historian, but a Torah scholar and a renowned Torah scholar who's authored so many books and who's had such a remarkable impact on the Jewish world, and whom I'm honored to, from time to time, to phone for advice, for counsel, for direction, but and also I'm honored to count as a friend, if I may say. And so Rabbi Berel Wein, welcome. It's such an honor to have you with us all today.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldstein. After such an introduction, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say, right?
And Rabbi Wein as well, we wrote a book together, which which I regard as such an honor, The Legacy.
The Legacy, an excellent book about what Lithuanian Jewry left us. I think there's a lot that we can learn from the book. Lithuania was a very, very poor country. It was a disease-ridden country. The life expectancy was not great. And Jews there for centuries lived a spiritual life, not just a physical life.
Yes.
And that's part of the challenge, I think, that this pandemic has visited upon us, is how to live with ourselves. How to live a spiritual, how to live when you can't go out, when you can't do things, when even you're financially impacted. And those are important lessons in life, because my inner self is not diseased.
Yes.
So it has to respond. And it responds in how I look at my family now, and how do I look at my society, and how do I look at the Jewish people and the country generally, right? Yeah. People say, it's going to get back. I don't know if it'll ever get back to what it was. We have no guarantee of that. But what we have to deal with what is, and construct our lives on that basis. And the Torah provides that basis. And I think that it's a sobering message. We would like happier ones. But I think it's an important message. And to a great extent, I'm not discouraged by it at all. I think positive things will result from all of this.
Yes, I think this point that you're making, that in a certain way, we don't have distractions to distract ourselves from ourselves. In other words, we have to live with ourselves. We have to be with ourselves. We have to be with our families. We have to just be. and there's no distraction of a trip or an outing or even a shul as it was in at the depth of the crisis. So we actually have to face who we are, and that can be a very deep growing experience.
There was a cartoon character in the United States called Pogo. It was very famous.
Yeah.
And he had a famous line. He said, "We have met the enemy and it is us."
Yes.
And it really is us, right? What do I think? What do I do? What do I read? What do I study? What do I tell my children? What do I tell my grandchildren? All the plans have been shattered, right? Nobody's doing what they plan to do. So now we have to do something else, right? We have to be able to do so. And I think that certainly the Jewish people are resilient and they're creative. And I think that good things will come out of this. It's not just a silver lining. I think in many respects we'll have a more balanced future than we had in the past.
I'd like to explore that with you, just to like what does this balanced future mean, and but also maybe just to take one step before looking at the future and what could emerge from this. It could be deeper, but I was intrigued as we were linking it back to Lithuania and the book that we wrote, because the book that we wrote was all about values. What were the values that animated the lives of the Lithuanian Jewish community? And obviously South African Jewish community is very influenced by that. Those are our ancestors. But you was the picture that you painted, and maybe you could just share a little bit more detail on that, of the hardship of daily life in Lithuania, because and somehow this is what I think is an important perspective, because somehow at this stage of the 21st century there's an expectation of life of ease, and if one looks at the historical sweep of humanity and civilization, actually the kind of prosperity and ease that we have experienced is not the norm. It's almost the exception.
That's correct. In Megillah Seicha, it says, Odom la'omol yulad. Person is born for toil. It's a question of lowering expectations. Like in Lithuania, no one had great expectations physically. No one, you weren't going to own a big house, or you weren't going to drive a big car. That was not going to happen. So then you had different expectations of morality, of teaching, of knowledge, of creative thinking, of invention. But if you have great expectations, so then you're doomed. You really are doomed to disappointment. And I think that we, to a certain extent, have raised the generations on great expectations. In the United States, they say that every generation will be wealthier than the generation before. Well, maybe not. And how do we deal with that? Is that a sign of failure? Maybe that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to, to get away from a lot of the nonsense that has dominated our societies over the past half century. So the Lithuanian Jew, he was happy with herring. And he didn't expect steak every night.
Yes. Yeah, because in our shuls here in South Africa, this kichel and herring is a big
sure,
staple.
because that was the staple, right? That when you made a bar mitzvah, that's what the menu was. When you had a bris, that was the menu.
Yes, it wasn't a 4-course.
No, it was not. And I give it to my father, of blessed memory. He told me he was bar mitzvah on a Thursday morning. They called him up. He had an aliyah, and then everybody had a piece of kichel and herring, and they went home when he was bar mitzvah, and goodbye.
Yeah.
Now, I don't demean what we have done, but I do think we have to be flexible enough to realize that whatever was in excess, it really did not contribute to us, did not help us. I don't need a wedding that I need 5,000 people to come to the wedding. And I don't need all of the trappings, etc. I think I think that I know for me, I can't speak for other rabbis, but for me, Zoom is a humbling experience. I can't see the people. I can't react with them. Nevertheless, I have to give a class. I have to teach. It's Torah. So to alleviate the problem, so I give lectures in shul. In the shul, I have 12 people, 13 people that come. Now, the great Rabbi Wein, I would never speak for 12, 13 people. Today, I'm happy to speak for 12, 13 people. And that's a very important lesson that focuses us. So I think that, that these things can be taught, and it should be taught to our children. We don't have to depress them, but we should make them realistic. It may not be, not everybody's going to go to university, and not everybody's going to be a doctor, and not everybody's going to have wealth, and it may not be. So that doesn't mean that my life is at an end and that it has no worth or value. It may have greater worth and value than it had before.
I think that isn't part of it.
Yeah.
It's what you were saying about in context of Lithuania. It is about where the striving for greatness is, because
Right.
there can be something very empowering. One can, on the one hand, pursue things which are dependent on other people, or one can pursue things of greatness which are internal, which is development of character, development of faith, learning Torah, wisdom, kindness, compassion, all of the humility, slow to anger, not being jealous, all this character development and wisdom and connection to eternal values, to mitzvahs that we have access to. In a certain sense, the physical world around us, we have lost the ability to control in the way that we do. So, but there is a world that we can control, and that's the world of
our inner world. Right? No question about it. I bemoaned the fact that the Musar movement from Lithuania did not continue in our time, but I think it could be redeveloped today. I really do. I think that, like for instance, the month of Elul. The month of Elul in Lithuania, people left their jobs and they went to back to the yeshiva for the month. Amongst Chassidim in Poland, they went to the Rebbe for a month. They gave up the job, they went. Today, today it's 24/7. How can you stop? How can you do? You have to be able to step back a little, to step back a lot. I don't know what the end will be here, but it will take, I think it'll take decades for all it is to play out.
Yeah.
I don't think, if they create a a vaccine tomorrow and everybody in the world is vaccinated, I still don't think we're going back to what it was.
Yes, people have seen that there's another way. Their eyes have been opened here to think
to a different way, and they've been made aware of how uncertain life is. This is one of the great lessons here. By us, we always were certain, right? Yeah. My financial advisor tells me what's going to be, right?
Yeah.
And my expert tells, no, all the experts have been exposed here. Nobody knows anything. So there's room for humility and for a lower profile. It'll be less doctrinaire. It'll be less certain. I think it's also a blow to the sections of Jewish society that think they know better, that are current, that follow every nuance of social correctness in our time, that are progressive. So you see that, it's nothing. There's a famous anecdote. I don't know if it's true, but it doesn't have to be true. That Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, had a disciple who was a very learned student, a very pious student. And when he left the yeshiva, he had a beard and he had peyot and a big kippah. And he went out into the world. He became a businessman, and he became a big businessman and a bigger businessman. And Reb Chaim saw him like 20 years later, and he saw that the beard had disappeared and the peyot were no longer there, and the yarmulke had shrunk into insignificance. So Reb Chaim asked him, he said, I'm a batlin. I sit and learn all day. I don't know anything about the world, but you're a man of the world. So you tell me, most of the world is sick or healthy? So the man said, Rebbe, I have to tell you the truth. Most of the people experience sickness. Very rare to go through life with complete health. He said, let me ask you a second question. Most of the world is rich or poor? He said, Rebbe, there's like the 1% that's rich, but most of the world struggles, from paycheck to paycheck to put food on the table. So he said, one more question I want to ask you. Most of the world is sane or meshuga? So he said, Rebbe, the truth is, most of the world is meshuga. You look at the world today, it's a mishugas. So Reb Chaim said to him, because of a sick, poor, crazy world, you cut off your beard? So that is a good lesson that we see now, right? Look what we did because of a sick, poor, crazy world, and now it's not here. So what are we left with? What are we supposed to do? And it's a hard lesson, a very hard lesson. But the Lord gives us hard lessons. If you look throughout Jewish history, there have always been plagues. The halacha is full of cholera epidemics and things such as that, typhus, etc. And the Jewish people dealt with it because they dealt with it spiritually, if they couldn't deal with it medically. And all of the troubles that we had and all the persecutions and all the poverty. And we have always been able to restore ourselves.
It's because it's been on this on the sense of the inner world. In other words, maybe as a historian, as you look as a historian over the sweep of thousands of years of Jewish history, and we've seen everything, and one lesson of Jewish history.
So it's always the inner world. The only reason that we're here is because of the inner world. Yeah. The only reason the Jewish, what's the secret of Jewish survival? The inner world. The fact
values,
that
the connection of
we believe that this is what we are, right? This is who we are. This is what we give to our children.
Values, those eternal divine values of the Torah are indestructible. There's no plague, there's nothing that can destroy them, and we have total control over that.
So there's another anecdote that I again, I don't know, can't swear to its accuracy, but they say that the Chofetz Chaim, when he was collecting money to build, wanted to build a brick building for the yeshiva in Radin, because the wooden building burned down every few years. So he came to a wealthy man, and the man told him, Rebbe, right now, I'm tied up. I'm not loose with cash, but don't worry. I'm going to put you in the will, and after 120 years, you'll have a sizable thing. So after a few years, the Chofetz Chaim got a note from the executor of the estate, in which the man had a large library of books, Judaica, Hebraica. And the executor informed the Chofetz Chaim that he left his money to his children, but he left the books to the yeshiva. So the Chofetz Chaim said, oh yeah, I thought he was smarter than that. He should have left the money to the yeshiva and the books to his children.
Yes.
And so that describes, what do we leave to our children? That's what we leave. We leave books, we leave ideas, we leave values, we leave examples. That's what we leave. Anything else that we leave, I always felt that the Gehenna of a rich man is that they show him in heaven what happens to his money after he's gone. He never took a vacation in his life. The kid right away went on a trip around the world.
Yeah, because there's the sense, I mean, it's really, and I think this is what this crisis is forcing all of us to focus on, and that is priorities. What is really important in life?
Absolutely.
And what can you actually, what is something that is in a certain sense indestructible and eternal, and it's our mitzvahs, and it's the good that we do in the world. That's the only thing.
From the Shabbat project, if you have a Shabbat at home, a Friday night meal at home with your children, grandchildren, with the family, with no telephone and no television and no distractions, that's an inheritance.
Yes.
Otherwise, Friday night is Friday night, what's on the soccer program.
Yeah.
And,
I think that's that's the interesting thing about Shabbos. As you mentioned it, I've been thinking a lot recently that in a certain sense, Shabbos, the message of Shabbos
is to exist without anything.
Yeah.
It's to exist with yourself, with your family. You can't do anything. You can't be distracted. There's nothing going on.
Yeah. And the amazing thing about it is we were actually debating about the Shabbos project this year. It's going to be in Parshas Vayera. It's actually the Shabbos after the American elections. So if there's ever a time for a need for Achdus, it'll be then. But what's so interesting is that our slogan for this year's Shabbos project, we haven't even announced it. Maybe I'll just tell you in confidence with all of our people.
Yeah, no, we won't reveal it.
It's going to be, Shabbos, bring it home, because
that's very good.
This year, we're not going to be able to have these huge challah and all the Havdalah concerts, but actually more important than any of that is really the sense that we are, that you can have a Shabbos at home, and that there's something so magnificent in it. And what I love about what you're saying is the fact that it's not just about the quality of the family experience. That is a value, that family time and that transmission of these eternal values. You say the Kiddush, you mention the going out of Egypt, you mention the creation of the world, you mention the holiness of the day. It's imparting values. That's a legacy. That's an inheritance.
That's right. And that no one can take from you. All the physical things can be taken from you, as we have seen. Yeah. Everything can be taken from you, but that can't be taken from you. Yeah. And that's an important thing, very important thing, how people should feel about it.
And then it brings joy, because I was just thinking back to, what you were saying about Lithuania, that on the one hand, you would think that life there was miserable and
They,
sad.
they were
But they
very
weren't
happy
bad
people.
I'm just
They
saying,
were very happy people, much happier than many a generation in the Western world today of Jews. And Jews are generally not so happy today, no matter what you have, because it's like drinking salt water. You can't have enough.
yeah,
So it's always, you're chasing something that you can't have, and that's a frustration. That's
yeah,
a frustration. There's no inner self. Uh, the, the pressures of society today are so enormous that it's almost impossible for a person to be normal.
yeah.
And that if you don't think that preys upon us, then you're really making a mistake. That's what happens.
I think that's a very powerful idea you're saying about the salt water. I think that the Vilna Gaon, right, he uses that analogy to his
Yeah,
family, that sense
right.
of this the materialism, that it can't fill the void within the human being. There's just
Because there's no limit to materialism. Chazal say, Misha yesh lo mona rotza masayim. Whoever has 100 wants 200. If you have 100 million, you want 200 million. If you have 100 billion, you want 200 billion. I'm always struck that there are people in the world that have billions of dollars. If they live like Methuselah, they will never be able to spend it. So then what? All right, but that's the nature of human beings. And we have to channel that nature. Uh, the Talmud says that whoever walks for Amot in Eretz Yisrael is a Ben Olam Haba, gains a piece of eternity. So I heard from a great Jew, Elio Kitov, Monkatovsky. He wrote the Sefer HaToda'ah and Ishu Beso and other books. He was a great Jew, a great Jew. So he told me that he was once walking with an American businessman, from Jew, Orthodox Jew, and the man was complaining. And, in Israel, the Lord has provided us with things that we can complain about. It's not perfect. And he was complaining. So Kitov said, I took his arm and I told him, march with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. We just did a mitzvah. 1, 2, 3, 4. We just did a mitzvah. That's how you have to look at the world.
yeah.
And
It's
the
such an
truth of the matter is
interesting.
the opportunity for mitzvah abounds wherever we turn.
Now you're saying specifically in these times, you're saying, or
Right,
you,
right.
yeah,
So ish l're'eu yomer chazak. Everyone has to strengthen everyone else.
yeah. Encouraging one another. That's such an important thing because that's where we get our courage from. One
That's
word of
right.
encouragement to another person,
Absolutely.
a call, a voice note, a text message. It's whatever it is. It lifts people in the most powerful way.
Rabbi Salanter said you're not allowed to walk around with a glum face,
Yeah.
because he said, my problem is not his problem. It shouldn't be his problem.
Yes.
All
That's
right.
so
So
beautiful.
so we're talking about a high level of achievement, but at least we should know what the goal is. Even if we don't get there, we should know what the goal is, what we're supposed to do, how it's supposed to happen. I've always been optimistic about the Jewish people, and I'm optimistic today too. And the Rebbeinu Shalom is nudging us.
And I think that's an important thing. I love that phrase, nudging, because we have to. For me, this is also what's so interesting, and maybe you can just share with everybody this idea of being a Torah scholar and a rabbi on the one hand and a historian on the other. In a certain sense, it is part of the same story, because Hashem
Certainly.
to us through the events that
The
occur.
Torah says, as Sefer told us, Adam, this is the book of the generations of human beings. This is the book. You look and see what happened before, then you know what's going on tonight. Part of the problem is that we have terrible amnesia. We don't know what happened before. We think the world began in 1967 or maybe if 1948 or before the Shoah. We don't know what happened before. Where do we come from? Who are my ancestors? What does it mean to be a Jew?
Yeah.
And I always feel, what would it be to meet Avram Avinu or Yitzchak or Yaakov or Sarah or Rivka, or Rachel or Leah, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to show them? Your iPhone? What does it mean, right? What are you going to say? What should it touch you?
Yeah, that touches on eternity, because an iPhone is just a tool. And
right.
and part of what I think has happened in modern life, that the confusion is we're confusing ourselves with our tools.
With the means with the end, absolutely. That became the end. There's not a means anymore.
Yeah.
Not only that, you see that if people have a phone, they are compelled to use it whether they have to or not. The nature, right? It's there. It's there. I have to. So my third cousin once removed, whom I never talked to, but because I have a phone, I can call him, or I can take a nap, or there's no limit to what I can do. So then it becomes the dominating force in my life. And it's not a tool. I become its tool.
Yes.
And that is, so all of that, has been jumbled up a little here. The Lord is, the Boni Shalom Kaviyachal has a sense of humor. He, he tried his, see what it looks like.
Yeah, because it's this theme that we've been talking about, this inner world. Because I was just also thinking, in a certain sense, at the beginning of the 21st century, like I was thinking to myself, on Shabbos I went out to go to shul. Our shuls have been closed until Rosh Chodesh Elul. It's been a long and hard time for us from that point of view. And I went out. Everyone's wearing masks, which is wonderful. That people are taking it seriously. But then I was thinking to myself, here we are at the beginning of the 21st century. And we're scurrying around in masks. Those photographs from the Spanish flu, and,
right.
and then you see them in masks, and then you think, no, if someone would have shown us that photograph in January and said, this is what the world looked like, you'd say, no, well, that was an old world. They didn't have our kind of medicine.
Right. That's
like
right.
The parallels with the Spanish flu, like what?
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've been there before. That's the whole point. We've been there before. But we prefer to think that somehow we are better, smarter, greater, whatever.
But I think in a certain sense, that's also the comfort. So on the one hand, it's the humility of knowing, listen, we thought we had gone beyond that, and now we've learned we haven't. But it's also, there's a comfort because the world has seen this, or
right. We've been there before. We went through this movie once before. We know all about it, right? We know. So eventually we'll get out of it. The world gets out of it. But what happens is after the Spanish flu, it's frightening. After the Spanish flu, and that was after the First World War, Europe disintegrated. And it brought about the Second World War. And Stalin came and Hitler came. And how did that happen? Because the world was, to a great extent, depressed. And when people are depressed, they look for some sort of great solution to get them out of it. When I came in, I told you, things are going to be all right, but it's going to take 10 years or 12 years or 15 years. I'll never get elected to office, right? On
Yeah.
such a program. I have to say that by the end of the year, there'll be a vaccine and everybody will be immune and we'll all be able to have football and everything will be wonderful. That's a winning political campaign. But who says that's the truth? And what happened after the Spanish flu was that Europe imploded. Germany, France, Austria, even the United Kingdom, even England, it all imploded.
And that was connected to the Spanish flu. I mean, there were other factors as well.
Yes,
You know,
there always are. But if it would not have been that the Spanish flu killed millions of people, people would have had a different attitude towards things. They would not have looked for a savior. That's what we're looking for now. We're looking for a savior. We're looking for someone that he's got the miracle cure. He's got all the answers.
And maybe the mistake is, this goes back to the theme we've been talking a lot about, is looking for that savior, is looking for the answer outside of ourselves instead of inside.
That's right. That's right. Because it's very hard, as you pointed out, to look at yourself. That we met the enemy and it's us. It's hard to deal with that. Hard to deal with that.
I mean, if I may come back to the point that you made, that you mentioned, Rabbi Wein, about the Musa movement, which we wrote about in our book. You wrote about it.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could just, because you were saying you think maybe it's now time for the return of the Musa movement, maybe to explain to some of the people who are listening, we have so many people on the line at the moment, just in brief, the Musa movement, what does it mean, and why do you see the sense of the calling for today's times?
Musa movement was created to, the famous statement was by Rabbi Israel Salanter, who was the founder of the movement. He said, reform came to change Judaism. Musa came to change Jews. It came to make a wholesome personality. Someone who was not schizophrenic. Someone who worshiped God and God was with him wherever he went, not just in the shul. Someone who saw in human beings the spark of divinity that all human beings have. Someone to whom honesty was a second nature, a trait. You didn't have to teach him to be honest. So, and they created a cadre of people like that, few thousand, that really had enormous influence in Lithuania and later in Jerusalem. And echoes of it still reverberate in the Jewish world today. And these were people that concentrated on themselves. I know my father-in-law of blessed memory was a disciple of the Chafetz Chaim. And my father-in-law attended the great Talmud Torah in Kelm, which was the outstanding Musar institution in the 1920s. He told me he worked on himself 7 years to eliminate anger.
Wow.
And the truth is that I knew him for decades and decades. Only once did I see him even come close to anger. To eliminate anger, wow. Who's interested to eliminate anger today, right?
Yes. And also just to pause on that for a moment, think about a person who says he worked 7 years to do that.
That's right. That's right. So that's it. People worked on themselves.
Depth.
People work on themselves 7 years to make money or to advance in their profession or to do other things or to become a professional athlete. So they become, when they're 7 or 8 years old, he's already playing football, right? Because he wants to play for Barcelona. So you got to work at it. And we think that somehow all the goodness and everything will happen automatically without our efforts. We're not going to have to work on it.
See, this is so profound and so important because it ties in everything that we've been talking about today, this idea of the inner world and an awareness of the richness of the inner world, that it's deep and profound, at the depth of the human soul and what that is. It's something which is also invigorating to be able to develop and to work
Right?
on. And it's, you know, that
My
that
father
last.
told me a wonderful story. He said that the Chafetz Chaim was a Kohen.
Yeah.
And the Gemara says, Kahane Raschonehein. Kohanim have a tendency somehow to temper. People laugh because they say that the Kohanim wash their hands and no one ever gives them anything to eat, but whatever the problem is. So he said, so in the hagiographic books and literature of our time, so you say the Chafetz Chaim was an angel and he never had a moment of anger in his life. But that's not human. And that's not true. So my father-in-law told me that once he was in the house with the Chafetz Chaim and something happened there with neighbors, with the family, something happened. And he felt himself getting angry. So he excused himself and he walked into the corner of the room and he talked to himself. And he said, Yisrael Meir, you're getting angry? It's going to help you? It'll be good for you to be angry? You think anger is positive? And he talked himself out of it.
Wow.
And that's a lesson that all of us can learn. I mean, I'm not embarrassed to say I've done it many times in my life too. I talked myself out of a situation. I excused myself in the middle of the conversation or whatever. And I said, Berel, are you crazy? What are you getting involved here? Talk yourself out of it.
Takes so much self-awareness and humility, but self-awareness, I mean, that's the
So
essence of the
Moshe Rabbeinu is Onav Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adoma. He's the most humble of all people. He's the greatest person that the world ever had, and he's the most humble. They go hand in hand. Humility breeds greatness. Arrogance breeds all sorts of ills. And arrogance is a product of our ego. We cannot control our ego. In Lithuania, they used to say that if someone, he came home and he told his mother, so-and-so insulted me. So in Lithuania, the answer is, so hat gesagt. So he said it. So now what? So what? And that takes a greatness of character, right? So he said it. So what? So okay. So, but our ego doesn't allow that. Our ego forces us to respond in kind, and that's what the Gemara says. The famous Gemara on Elovim Veinom Olvim, Shomim Cherposim Veinom Meshivim. Those who are insulted and they don't insult back. Those who hear others demean them and they don't demean others. Aleim Ani Omer, regarding them does the Torah say, Ve'olavov K'seis Hashemesh B'gvuraso. Those who love God have the power of the sun when it rises in the morning to go out to lighten the world. So that's self-restraint.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the education of a child. A baby has no self-restraint. So I know that's not nice to say, but just as we teach them to have self-restraint regarding bodily functions, right?
Yeah.
So we can teach them to have self-restraint regarding other things as well.
I think this point of self-restraint is so important, because trying to been learning Mishle, proverbs. I was learning with my daughter, and we were debating this issue of what is the essence of what it is of Judaism. What is it? And we came out with this definition that it is about wisdom. It is about the triumph of wisdom over instincts. The human being wants to live in a certain way. That's not only physical instincts, it's emotional instincts. And there's a beautiful phrase in Mishle that the ideal person is a chacham leiv, a
Right.
person who's wise of heart. And the Malbim says there that wisdom enters the person's heart, so
That's
that
right. It
all of his
changes him.
instincts are now framed within of doing right and our
That's
mitzvahs and
right.
our Torah. So it's a
That's right.
transformed person.
Exactly right. And that can be taught. It can be taught in our schools. It can be taught restraint. I remember when I was in the yeshiva, so all of my rabbeim were Litvish rabbonim. And I look back at those years, they were people that had such restraint, such patience, because they were great gaonim, great scholars, and they're teaching American guys that want to go to the ball game, that don't want to be sitting there. So how do you do that? And the interesting thing is that they won. We're the ones that changed. We didn't go to the ball game anymore. We wanted to go to the yeshiva, to the shir.
Yeah.
And they did it through restraint. They never hollered at us. They never, they never put the pressure. But the example was sufficient to, I think of my teachers, the example, I cannot come to their ankles. But there's a lesson in that. There is a lesson in that. And we can all achieve it.
Yeah.
What do we remember about our parents? We remember their example. That's all that we remember. There's nothing else we can remember, for good or for better. And I think that if I may be so bold, I think I've told it to many a young rabbi. What should he do? I said, you should be an example. That's all you should do.
Yeah.
There's nothing else you can do. All the sermons in the world aren't going to melt your congregation. But an exemplary personality, an act of goodness and kindness, that will have an influence that lasts for centuries.
And I think that that's so powerful in terms of the concept of leadership, which is, in a certain sense, we're all leaders, which is every single person here who's participating in this is to start from yourself. And then you if you work on yourself, you lead yourself. There's a refinement of self, and then that moves outward.
Certainly.
I'm fascinated by this contrast of your teachers coming from Lithuania and teaching American boys, and that sort of culture gap in a certain sense, but yet they gave those values.
They didn't even know English, so they're teaching in Yiddish. We had to learn Yiddish, and I remember once I was in 10th grade or whatever. The Rebbe was the 4th of July was going to be the next day. The 4th of July in America is, and the 4th of July, there always was a major baseball game in Chicago. And everybody went to the baseball game.
You were born in Chicago.
Yeah. And the Rebbe, who didn't know about the 4th of July, and he certainly didn't know about the baseball game. So on the 3rd of July, he said to us, tomorrow we're going to learn this and this piece in the Gemara. This is what you should prepare. We'll learn it tomorrow. So all of us geniuses had a meeting. Who's going to tell him that tomorrow is the 4th of July, and there's no yeshiva on the 4th of July. But he was such a holy man, he was such a tzaddik, that no one had the nerve to tell him. And we all showed up on the 4th of July to learn that piece of Gemara. And when I look back at it, that was a turning point in my life. He didn't realize it, but it was a turning point in my life. So, we all have powers and instincts and greatness within us, so we have to try and develop it to the extent that we can. And
It's so
children
beautiful
remember
about
what
that.
their parents are, not what their parents say.
Yes. What's so beautiful about that story is as you said, he never raised his voice. And
No,
he didn't threaten punishment, and
no.
there was a purity of it. It's a purity of
But
value. Which you could,
we felt, how could we hurt him? He's like he was so fragile as a holy person. How are we going to hurt him?
yeah.
That's
And so like that moment, it was like choosing between the values of the 4th of July or the
absolutely,
values
that's
of
right.
like
So
eternal values of
that
the Jewish
moment you
people.
made up your mind, were you going to be a yeshiva student, a Ben Torah, or you're going to be an American guy that just happens to go to a yeshiva? There's a big difference.
And maybe if I can borrow that analogy in a certain sense, through COVID, the whole world took away the 4th of July, like the world took away
Absolutely.
the
There's
4th
no
of
4th
July.
of
So now
July
that means
anymore.
we can now
All
sit
went
in the
away.
shade, right?
And they're playing baseball without an audience. Nobody's there. What a lesson.
Yeah. So
Okay,
I think that's what we're really saying, is that in a certain sense, we need to grow from this. I think the big tragedy would be is if we get to the other side of this and we're not changed.
And we're the same that we were before. That would be then it's a complete waste.
Yeah. And maybe that's why at this time it's the hand of Hashem. We're preparing for Rosh Hashanah, and it's and maybe this we can sort of draw our discussion to a close of just like thinking as we're preparing now for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and there's really the sense on Rosh Hashanah about the vulnerability, mi yechia, mi yamos, that real sense of and so like if you're giving advice to all of us as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah at this time, in this moment in history, what I mean, in a certain sense, it's everything we've been talking about.
We have to, there's a custom, it's mentioned in the Gemara, that if a person, God forbid, is ill, they change the person's name. Yeah. So that the decree of heaven is on so and so, but but that's not him anymore. To a certain extent, we all have to change our name. We all have to be a different person. We all have to say, that was last year I was, Schmendrick. I'm not this year. I'm somebody different. You give me a chance, I'll prove it. I'll show it to you. That's a tremendous weapon, Leo Madin.
Yeah. And then in a certain sense, our practical actions will just be the extension of who we are.
Absolutely.
It's the inner world.
Absolutely. So then that's what drives us. That's what makes us move. That's what gives us that.
So there's an opportunity for a fresh and new beginning. In a certain sense, it seems from what we're saying here is that we shouldn't look at what we've lost. We must look at what has moved in our world and has opened up gateways to whole new ways of looking at ourselves and our lives.
Absolutely. It's opportunities. We have opportunities that we never dreamt of before.
Yeah.
Rabbi, it's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Rabbi Wein, thank you for your time today. And I want to thank you also publicly for all of the guidance and advice and your friendship to me personally. It means the world to me. You're always on the other end of a phone, and I phone you often for advice, and to have a chance to share your wisdom with our whole community here is something which is a real gift.
Continue to be matzliach. You're the gift of South African Jewry that keeps on giving. Kol tuv Sela.
Kol tuv.
Ksiva v'chasima.
Good year to you, Rabbi Wein.
Amen. You too. Kol tuv.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to host Rabbi Wein and to share from his incredible wisdom and historical perspective. And look forward to being with all of you next week as we continue our journey in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. Next week, we'll have the opportunity to be in conversation with Rabbi Wawa Jacobson, and the week after with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. And so we are preparing for Rosh Hashanah and the new year by delving into the wisdom of the Torah to give us the direction of how we can seize the opportunity of these historic times. God bless you, and a Shavua Tov to everybody.